Okay, if I'm going to ask you to develop some high quality mind maps or concept maps, I think it's fair to ask, what does a good one look like? What's a good concept map appear like? And I've got one in the corner of this cover screen here. You can see, in fact, that it's quite large and cumbersome, but you can see large amounts of color coming through it and so on. We'll have a look at that concept map itself, in detail, but we'll also explore a couple of others and see what their commonalities are in this video. Something I want to put forward to you at the very outset is this little bit of a quote that I've got on the opening screen here. When we're mind mapping, bear in mind that it's the questions you have that teach you the most. It's the challenges. It's that, what do I put down? What's important? Should I include this? Where should I include it? Should I change color? What's the right color? How does this join? It's those questions that will teach you the most. They're the thinking questions. It then goes on, if a little bit sexistly, it goes, if you give a man an answer, he gains a little fact. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you get the questions, you start looking for those bigger, more important answers yourself. So it's when you struggle with the concept map that the concept map starts to work. So let's have a look at the next little bit here. The examples I'm going to give to you are all designed by history students. I didn't create them. Okay, I'm just going to drag across a few slides or a few pages out of my OneNote, and we'll have a look at what some of these characteristics are. And we're going to start with this particular one that I've been using as sort of a visual reminder in the corner. So let's have a look at that concept map here. I'll just make it a little bit larger for us. And here we go. Let's drag it out. Sorry, not quite doing what I thought it was going to do there. Let's drag out that concept map for you. So this concept map, when you have a look at it, is actually quite huge. The concept map, it actually relates to Russian history in grade 11. So getting a sense of how it's put together, I'm just trying to find the corner of this person's concept map, of this person's OneNote page. It's sitting up here. And the concept map itself is quite huge. Notice how this student has started well away from the left-hand margin because she's not really sure in what direction a concept map will go. Notice how the concept map has probably flown in phases. She's even got elements off to the side that don't connect, which she would be grappling with. One of my points to her was, well, where does this bit fit in relation to the rest? Is it completely separate? Is that the point? I'm going to put to you that as this student studied for the exam, she was able to identify by colour how many important concepts there were. I guess we've got green, purple is 2, there's this pinkish reddish sort of colour is 3, this colour here, not quite how to describe it, is 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Maybe ignore the black, maybe it connects over here and so on. But it's interesting you've got 8 distinct blocks of question, and I can tell you that in the exam she did, there are actually 8 questions. She's got about 8 distinct areas of focus that came up in the unit as she was thinking about it. And it coincidentally matched up to the number of questions on the exam. I put to her that that was probably a good thing. Let's have a look at how she has put these ideas together. She actually started with this idea here of Russian history. She actually started with the earliest bit, Tsarist Russia, sitting around here. And then she flowed outwards. She went Russian government, a Russian overview. She started to move out here, and if you think, she sort of had dead ends. But then some ideas became incredibly important and complex. Let's see if I can just move this pink area up here. A lot of connections starting to go on and a lot of detail. Notice it's not just a shopping list. Every now and then there's a linear, this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. You can see those stepping through. But other times it's more complicated. Other times there is a more complex relationship between ideas. It's these lines and joins that matter. There's some complexity here. All the time when she changes colour, She's thinking about how ideas connect. Now, it's interesting, this student particularly liked using lines to keep herself organised. A lot of students don't do it that way. But what we've got here is an example of what makes a concept map come together. Sometimes it's quite linear, but often it's not. Sometimes it's like ideas step through. It will develop unevenly. It's interesting that this area here took some time for her to develop. She didn't spot the connections there at first, didn't know where to put information in. And you can see at times double-headed arrows, not just single direction. This is information that flows both ways. Think about how she might change it. Look at these little dead ends that appear. Not every idea is of equal value. She's highlighting some areas. Okay, so that's an example. Let's have a look at another example related to World War I. And this one is done by some grade 9 students, or this one's done by a grade 9 student. So we'll just make that a little bit larger. I'll drag it over here. Again, a lot of information in there. Look at the complexity of line directions in some of this. Look at how she's trying to draw concepts together. Again, you can identify big chunks of important information. It would appear that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 important colours. 6, therefore, perhaps important ideas that she needed to study prior to her exam. Notice ideas go back and forth. They don't necessarily just lead downwards. The complexity of some ideas. We can pinch and enlarge and go in closer to it. See what she's put in. Here's an interesting idea. Putting in hyperlinks, allowing us to go to other parts of our OneNote or other parts of our study. Images can be inserted. Maps can be inserted and interacted with. So, make your concept map yours. I think it is easy to do high quality concept maps when you handwrite. So that's quite a tight, neat, contained concept map, but that's probably the way her mind was working, and it was sort of spilling and swirling outwards from a centre point, which was World War I. Feel free to sort of stop these and explore how people are laying out their OneNotes, how they're laying out their concept maps rather. Let's have another look at this one, or a look at another one. Again, it's pretty obvious where this student started. She's then got quite a linear structured sort of note-taking way, but you can see her saying, well, this type of approach doesn't always work, that it is necessary to break ideas out. It's not always as simple as saying one thing led to another in a linear fashion. It's not always a list of information that we're trying to put here. We're looking for connections. These cross connections become very important. So some interesting ideas there. Let's look at one more concept map just to explore how another student has approached concept mapping when it loads. There we go. So I included this one because a lot of people think, well, it seems that all concept maps have to be super neat. I actually would argue that most concept maps actually aren't super neat, that they have an organised structure to them, but sometimes the ideas seem to go in all sorts of directions. We have ideas over here, such as the Anzac legend, being connected way back over to something on the other side. Sometimes your concept maps won't always, I guess, play out the way you thought they would. So we've connected this idea of Australian New Zealand Anzacs to the Anzac legend. This idea tucked in the middle there has to go all the way around to the other side. Notice sometimes there is a linear approach, a straight line of ideas, but often the ideas are much more split up, more complicated. Sometimes there are questions being asked, and you might be able to see in here the student's asking the question why, if I can find that little spot again. It's a slight lag. Where and why and when. Sometimes that's a useful way of organising ideas. So think about when you're doing your concept map, how they might come together. So as you're thinking about how your concept maps, just bear in mind that sometimes your concept maps will reveal gaps in your understanding. And that's a good thing. A good concept map tests your thinking. Often, it's a good tip to start simply with some basic information. In history, it might be a where and a when, it might be a name, and then gradually build out in complexity. Don't go for just big I don't know questions straight away. Start simple, build in complexity. When you spot the connections between ideas, you're making some good progress. So be conscious of that. Bear in mind that being a little bit unsuccessful is a good thing. Sometimes it's that struggle to find the connections that reveals the important complexity of thinking. That's where your thinking happens, in the questioning, in the challenging. And so we'll leave you with that quote again. It's often in the questions that you can't answer that you're learning the most. The questions that you struggle to answer teach us how to think. If you get your answers too easily, perhaps they're only easy answers. But when you develop hard questions, when you find connections that are hard to make, when you're struggling to join ideas, that's where you find your best answers.